and finally it will come back to you. So there are a number of additional opportunities for the public to come and comment on the plan, give us suggestions. We anticipate that there will be changes. That's just the nature of adopting a document this large and this important. So nothing has been carved into stone yet, and we're open to suggestions. And with that, I will conclude and here to answer your questions.
Thank you, Eric. To the board members, discussion on the presentation by Ms. Glassy or Mr. Norris. Supervisor Pinches.
I have a couple of questions, but first of all, I appreciate that picture of Laytonville. That's a picture of my dad's ranch.
Okay, any other comments from the board? Been a long time coming. I'm surprised at the silence.
Mr. Chairman, I got just a couple. In the section under community of Laytonville, it's in policy CP-L-5 on page, it's under the Laytonville Community Planning Area on the page 6.0.26.
Yeah.
Says the installation of new billboards along State Route 101 in Long Valley is prohibited. That's, you know, I wrote down that the goals of this is to minimize new regulations. That's certainly a very restrictive regulation, and it picks out, in my opinion, because Laytonville sits and is always going to sit right on 101, which is a major corridor, to eliminate, and that totally prohibits. There's no, the verbiage in there is pretty clear that it prohibits. I mean, that's Todd signage and everything. I think that's too restrictive for that wording to be put in this plan.
Well, it does say new billboard, Supervisor.
It does say new
Pinches.
billboards, and I think when we said to...
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
My position's still the same. I mean, you know, when you're on a little town, and I've been in that business in that little town since I was 17 years old, and you basically have one source to do business from, and that's from the highway. And if you don't have some sort of signage out there to advertise your wares, it puts you to a very competitive disadvantage. And I just think that wording, that's a totally prohibition of it. It says no, for no exceptions or anything. It gives no discretion. You know, so that when somebody goes for an application to the Building and Planning Department, they say, well, it's not allowed in the general plan, period. I think that verbiage is too restrictive.
Well, we'll definitely look to the board for direction on that issue. It does deal with billboards, and billboards are different from the sign in front of your store in that a billboard is typically a sign somewhere else. It says, come to my store 10 miles away. So make sure we understand what that is. The other point about minimizing new regulations is we interpreted that to mean that, for instance, if you were operating a hardware store in Laytonville, that we didn't want to write new regulations that affected how you operate a hardware store. So we've been pretty consistent with that throughout the plan. But stop saying no new billboards wasn't seen as a regulation that affected someone who's there now.
Billboards are allowed if you want to advertise a business or something 100 miles away in a neighbor county, but it seems kind of irregular if you can't advertise something that's in your own town or in your own county.
Yeah, again,
I mean, if you're gonna eliminate them all, at least eliminate your competitor's sign.
yeah. Well, actually, there is an action item here to establish an amortization program to eliminate the existing billboards, and the general idea is to improve the appearance of the community by reducing the billboards. But again, we'll look to the board for direction on that issue, and you may hear others from the community who want to
I just believe that our
as well.
Building and Planning Department should have some discretionary rule there that allows something, you know, if there's a good argument for a billboard to be placed or something.
Sure.
Because certain businesses require it to be advertised. And I just think it puts Laytonville in a competitive disadvantage to all the other communities up and down Highway 101, or any major highway for that matter. I'd like to hear from my colleagues to see how they feel on it.
Others? Jump into the fray here. Not hearing any. John? Where did this policy come from? Was it driven by LMAC,
The policy-
community inputs?
The policies that are in the community sections basically came from the workshops that we had out in those places. So these actually go back, I think, originally to the framework document, which was released about, 3 years ago now, which was based on workshops that were held a little earlier than that, even out in the community areas.
Okay.
But again, it's, as is everything in here, is open to discussion, and we'll look to the board to make a decision on that.
I would move to have that sentence struck.
Um,
The one sentence,
CP-5-L-5,
yes.
so that entire policy? Because there's an action item that follows that.
Well, with that, if you strike the first sentence, I guess you could leave the assigned amortization program. I don't know who's going to do that, but anything. I mean, I'm just interested in eliminating the one sentence that says the installation of new billboards along State Route 101 in Long Valley is prohibited. And it don't even say what area of Long Valley is a very long valley. It includes several miles frontage to Highway 101. So what's the boundaries of that? It's very vague and it's very restricted, and I just don't think that I don't think it's in, getting back to what is one of the policies of this is to minimize new regulations. And I think it's a very restrictive regulation. And I would make a motion to eliminate that sentence.
Okay, so you submitted a motion. Do I hear a second to that?
Second.
Okay, there is a second to eliminate policy CP-L-5 on page 26, which states the installation of new billboards along State Route 101 in Long Valley is prohibited. Discussion to the motion? Supervisor Delbert?
No, I have a question on process. when we're
Okay,
done
all right. So let's take up that motion. All those in favor of that deletion signify by saying aye. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just trying to compare, and maybe since you have a lot more working knowledge of this, I'm trying to look at it, how it would compare to perhaps Hopland, which has the same sort of configuration of commercial along a federal highway. And, I just have a concern that these were community meetings that were attended, and that if the community somehow it got in here, you didn't just invent it. So somehow the community got it in, and I'm just does it have any comparatives to Hopland? And if so, what were the comparative discussions?
Well, there is the same policy is in the Hopland section on page 21 in that section. Policy CPH 14. You'll see the same policy and the same action item.